The UCLA men's basketball season's in full swing, and we need you to get to Pauley Pavilion to support the Bruins. Don't miss a single chance to see this year's exciting team, led by Donovan Dent, Eric Daly Jr., Sky Clark, and Tyler Bilodeau. Pauley Pavilion, presented by Westcon Financials, the home of the greatest tradition in all of college basketball. We can't wait to have you join us as the Bruins continue to build on that legacy. With big-time matchups, go to uclabruins.com/tickets to secure your seats today before it's too late. Let's get Pauley rocking.
Good afternoon. We're getting right down to business here. We are doing it live and doing more at 4 weekday afternoons, right after the Guy Benson Show at 3 and just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. Motec on Money. We're live on the air on 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com. And, the on-demand Motec on Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple iTunes, YouTube, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Stocks kicking off the week with a pullback. Cryptos taking another hit. Gold and silver rally. All this in reaction to fallout from last week's decision by the U.S. Supreme Court on President Trump's tariffs and worries about the economic fallout from artificial intelligence, which has been a big issue lately. The Dow came in for a closing loss of 822 points. American Express, Goldman Sachs, and J.P. Morgan Chase weighed on the Dow today. The S&P 500 slipped 72, and the NASDAQ gave back 259 points. Looks like those software names took another hit today. Bonds rallied, sending the yield in the 10-year note down to 4.04%. That's the lowest we've seen since last November. So some cheers in the real estate sector on that, since that's the one that impacts fixed-rate mortgage rates. Over the weekend, President Trump announced he'd increase to 15% his new global tariffs aimed at replacing many of the tariffs ruled illegal by the U.S. Supreme Court last week. Over the weekend, the U.S. Trade Representative said America intends to hold to its existing bilateral trade deals, but the head of the European Parliament's Trade Committee said he would propose pausing the process to sign off on the European Union-U.S. deal in response to what he called pure tariff chaos at this point. After the Supreme Court ruling, the president now pondering new national security tariffs. We're keeping an eye on that, and we'll talk more about all of this with our legal eagle, Royal Oakes, longtime KBC legal analyst and co-host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast, will be joining us live later this hour. Tensions running high in the Middle East ahead of possible U.S. military action against Iran. The latest headlines we're following here: students at universities in Iran have held a third consecutive day of protests just over a month after the violent suppression by Iranian security services of mass street demonstrations left thousands of Iranians dead. The protests coming amid tensions between Iran and the U.S. Washington continues to build up military forces in the region and pressure in the Middle East as it negotiates with Iran, and the next round in Geneva is scheduled for Thursday. The president has warned again really bad things will happen if there is no deal with Iran. Meanwhile, Iran would retaliate ferociously. That's the word being used today by the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman. Meanwhile, American citizens in parts of Mexico now advised to shelter in place due to what happened over the weekend. Outbursts of violence after a Mexican drug cartel leader was killed. The cartel boss, known as El Mencho, led to the authorities captured and killed him. Mexican authorities said in an assessment of Sunday's operation, after which 25 members of the National Guard and military police in Mexico were killed in retaliatory violence. I'll discuss all that latest news with retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, retired U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, national security analyst, and host of the Strat podcast. But first, on your money, the markets, and the economy, and the whole works now, top-ranked money manager Ken Winans, president and chief investment officer at Winans Investments at winansinvestments.com. Ken Winans, also a market historian, author of numerous books. His latest is Investment Atlas 3, also Forbes magazine contributor. He hosts Winning with Winans show and podcast in the Las Vegas area, and the Wealth Minute features right here on your favorite station, 790 KBC. Ken Winans, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Well, hello, Frank. And here we came off of a wonderful weekend with our Olympic team just doing so fantastic, and faced with all this new crosswinds of geopolitical and economic headlines. But I was going to say a couple of things that, on these pullbacks, it's an opportunity to learn and try to sniff out where is going to be the leadership for this market. So a couple of things that I've heard in the press, that one is just a downright fallacy, which is that the NASDAQ never loses out to the Dow ever. That's absolute nonsense. All you have to do is go back to look at even just the year 2016. the Dow outperformed the NASDAQ. So it's not as the NASDAQ goes, so goes the rest of the stock market. But it is a good indicator that, like you said, a lot of the names in tech, especially the newer tech, are just having a tough time. And I don't think they're the lead group for the year. The other interesting thing that I think that anybody who was told last year that they should dump all their U.S. stocks and buy foreign, interesting that the dollar is very stable right now. The dollar is actually, basically flat so far in 2026, down slightly from 2025. Now, what I'm talking about is the dollar index. I'm not talking about specifically against a currency. But why is that important? Because as you have a down day today with U.S. stocks, foreign ETFs are also not, generally speaking, having a good day. Last year was different. So it is time for people to really reassess. Here we are 2 months into 2026. And if your portfolio has a goose egg, you need to start making some adjustments.
All right. What about precious metals? Another bounce today for both gold and silver, outperforming cryptos by far. And I certainly want to talk to you about that as well. But gold, I see here back above 5,200, 5,255 and change. Silver got a pop and is back above $88 an ounce. What do you make of the latest moves on the upside in the precious metals?
Frank, I think, we obviously had the blow off in January, and it did scare a lot of people. Well, welcome to the world of commodities and precious metals. When they head south, they head south fast. But the good news is, as you just pointed out, my friend, that they have basically bottomed out. They're moving back up. Now, it does not mean that we're not going to have some volatility in the metals. But what was a very good sign today is not just that the ETFs in gold, silver, and the commodity futures are going up, but the gold mining stocks themselves, many of them from Canada, also having a good day. So I think, again, if you are not in, natural resources, and certainly with what's going on with oil right now, you're underweighted in areas that will probably have a good year, and you need to make some adjustments.
All right. As far as the miners go, of course, we got to put copper in the mix too, which has been hitting record highs this year. What are some of your favorite names in the mining sector?
Well, they're interesting. I ran the screen not long ago. And what I mean by that is I ran it to see companies that they were obviously exchange traded in the United States, accounting's done in the United States, and the names that came up, I've even thought about a lot of these names for a long time. But certainly some of the names, I'll roll them right off. There's New Gold, which is symbol NGD. There's Kinross Gold, which is symbol KGC. There's Hudbay Minerals, which is HBM. And then there's Agnico Eagle Mines, which is AEM. Now, Frank, again, these are names that you and I have never talked about before, but you've got to look for where things are moving. They've already had a big run for the year, but they're just attracting buyers. They're not pulling back. And when gold and silver pulled back in January, these particular stocks didn't take as much of a hit. So again, friend is your friend. You got to go with it.
All right, then the other name that I think we have talked about certainly over the last year, Freeport McMoran, right, which also
absolutely
deals with copper as well as other precious metals. So we're keeping an eye on that one, which got a bounce today. Where do you see the precious metals go from here?
Here's the thing. I think, and it's tied into also what's going on with crypto. I think I mentioned that last fall I went to the Schwab Investment Advisor Conference that was in Denver. And it was very telling that there were probably 5 or 6 booths about cryptocurrencies. And we knew that at that point in time, crypto was already weakening. But what was interesting was the lack of exposure to commodities in general, and specifically what was going on with precious metals. And I really do think that the so-called smart money in the investment services world is realizing they have got to learn fast. And there's a massive reallocation of money that I think was earmarked for crypto that continues to go back into gold and silver. And the fact that, technically speaking, gold and silver snapped right off technical support points and headed north. And then when there's ever been a rally in Bitcoin's healthier than Ether, but whenever there's a rally in crypto, it looks like people just sell into it. So it's not a healthy environment in crypto land at this point.
Right. We're looking at Bitcoin right now, cracking below 65,000 today at around 64,600 or so. And then you got Ethereum back down to around 1,855. Doge hanging in there at 9 cents. What's your reaction to this latest price action here? And Michael Saylor's strategy, reportedly buying that dip and sitting on tremendous unrealized losses. What are your thoughts about all this?
I'm an old technician, and I've also learned over a long period of time, you don't try to catch a falling knife. I'd rather just let this thing play itself out. What you want to see in crypto, and especially in something like Ether, that reminds me of like watching bull riding in the rodeo. It's bouncing all over the place. You're trying to follow where it's going to go. You got to let these things bottom out. You got to let them, as we call, base. And that means that they calm down, they form a logical place where there's an equilibrium of buyers and sellers. We don't have that yet. And I honestly believe that until you've cleared the air on the regulatory hurdles with crypto, when you can finally have a clear path, that this makes more sense. But I mean, the general public that, and unfortunately, I think too, Frank, as you and I know, a lot of people were late to the party in crypto. And as you said, they are in net losses. And I think that a lot of them, they sold their losses off last year. Maybe they put their toe back in the water. They're now losing again. And I think, again, when you have that, it doesn't instill confidence to step back in with most of it. But I would say this. I wouldn't write off crypto. Obviously, I went through my cryptocurrency, trading certification. I believe that it has a place, but we are still trying to sort through the regulatory murkiness of where it's going to come in. But again, I think you just got to let this volatility play itself out.
On there live with top-ranked money manager Ken Winans. Have you caught that tweet or X posting by Michael Saylor last week? Said he thought that Bitcoin was either going to go to 0 or 1 million per coin. Where do you think it's going between that, Ken
Well,
Winans?
I understand. If you're a perma bull or a perma bear, you have to kind of stand your ground. I think that Bitcoin itself, you're almost at a point now, you've got to separate the crypto. You've got to just say, look, Solana's different, Ether's different, Bitcoin's different. They're different in technology and they're different in how they're structured, but you've also got to look at popularity. And I do think that when things begin to calm down, especially for Bitcoin, retail people will come back to the party. But again, you're having a lot of the same thing that you see happening with NASDAQ. Don't forget the relationship. Most people, funny how they do this, but it's typical when the NASDAQ's down for a quarter, Bitcoin and other cryptos are down as well. It's an odd cousin relationship. It's been going on since the beginning. But again, I think, keep that in mind. So I think, again, stability in the NASDAQ, reemerging with some of what's going on there will help stabilize Bitcoin. But again, also, as I mentioned earlier, trend is your friend. The metals are hot. People are still sending money over that way. They're wanting to put more money that way. And I think, again, you just don't want to fight that.
All right. What about all the software, the blowout we've seen in the software world? We see Salesforce, for example, down more $7 today, back to $178. What's going on in that sector? And are you doing any bottom fishing there?
Well, it's funny. You almost would like to, whenever the index agencies begin to add some of these stocks, is about the time you want to sell them. You mentioned Salesforce. It's just getting creamed. It's down 33% on the year. In the last 20 months, it's down 47%. That certainly tells you what's going on in the CRM space. But you can say this down to, IBM just ended up getting hammered. Amazon's down 11. So unfortunately, a lot of these big names that all the indices were adding to their to the components, both Dow and the S&P, they're really waiting on things. What I find interesting in tech is that I've been looking at the older type tech names, and believe it or not, Frank, a lot of those old line companies are actually doing pretty darn well. They're up on the year. It's actually interesting to look at a lot of the old electronic companies that make cables. One of my favorites is Amphenol. And, we can talk about how much we need, with AI type technology. Well, I have news for you. You're still going to need copper cables running out the back of these boxes. So again, companies like that seem to be doing very well. But I will just say this, the group that absolutely is astounding me so far this year, and I just don't think anybody was betting on this, is retail. We thought, retail was going to sell off after holiday season. That holiday season, actually, the numbers were fake. Well, look at what we're dealing with here. Walmart is up 13% on the year. Casey's General Stores is actually up 22% on the year. AutoZone up 13%. So I look at the various retail sectors, and again, it's just sometimes it's the tortoise or the hare, and you want to bet on the tortoise. And I think that's what we have going on right now.
All right. What about the tariff situation and that highly anticipated ruling we got from the U.S. Supreme Court striking down the president's tariff plans for the most part, and the president coming out with that 15% plan? Some of the retailers, Costco, for example, had challenged the tariffs already some time ago. What kind of fallout do you see here, and where do you see the winners and losers in all this?
Well, Frank, it's funny. I think, you and I have seen a lot over the years that we've been talking to each other. And this tariff thing, if you can imagine a boomerang, which is for people who remember them as a kid, you throw them and you don't quite know where it's going to come back at you. And you hope you don't get hit in the head with the thing. That's how I kind of feel right now about the tariffs. I mean, it's, people thought that the Supreme Court ruling would be done and said about all this. Well, guess what? It's not. It's a bit like the movie Rocky. Just when you think it's down for the count, it's back up. Again, you've got to follow trends right now. And the guidance coming from companies going into the first quarter is going to be critical to see what happens. Right now the big talk is, are there going to be demands on refunds of these tariffs, which I think is something like $183 billion, some crazy number. So with that being said, you can also understand why some of the financials are getting hammered right now. But Frank, it's just the crosswinds are all over the place. It's still early in the year. But I will just simply say, though, as much as people look at the headlines and get scared, I just want you to realize, in spite of all of that, the Dow Industrial Average is up 3% on the first 2 months of the year. The S&P 400 mid-cap is up 7%. And believe it or not, the Russell 2000, these small companies that are supposed to get hammered with these kind of economic sensitivities, is up 6%. So that's telling you there are places to go and make money.
All right. And last but not least, we'll talk more about this hour, of course, is the geopolitical situation with the upheaval in Mexico over the weekend. We're keeping an eye on what's happening there, of course, and in the Middle East as well, with the U.S. and Iran set to lock horns. And in all this, oil is back above $66 a barrel. What's your reaction to those latest headlines?
Well, here's the thing. We knew that the spillover from Venezuela when we were going after the cartels in South America was going to continue. The fact that it's spilling into Central America now, and I'm just particularly with Mexico, I think it's sad for the tourist destinations. I certainly am one of many people who love to go down there and vacation. I think it's going to give people a moment of pause. But the fact that we have border security right now, I'm less concerned about it spilling into our borders. I think the situation in Iran, we had the same concern before we bombed the nuclear facilities. The markets would get volatile. I think if there's actual airstrikes, we will see some volatility. And I do think we'll probably see oil easily get back above 70 a barrel. But do remember that we're not as dependent, and many other parts of the world are also not as dependent on Iranian oil, especially now with the embargoes, and certainly with what we're seeing coming out of Russia, as we were before. So I don't think it has lasting effects.
All right. And last but not least, Ken Winans, any specific places where you're putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Well, I'll tell you, I mentioned the retailers, and I think, again, I know people like to just think that they're just a temporary move, but I think you're going to have to take a good hard look there. I think, again, look at what is moving right now, defense stocks. I've been talking a lot about defense stocks for a good part of the last 3 years. It's not just because of Iran, but they've been one of the dominant group. So I'm going to throw GE Aerospace into there, symbol GE. I'm going to throw Kratos Aerospace, which makes the drones, KTOS. Both of them have had strong years. They're down slightly today, but again, that's where the money's going. That's the new military. You need to go with it.
Terrific, Ken. Thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon with so much going on. That is top-ranked money manager Ken Winans, President and Chief Investment Officer at Winans Investments. Go to winansinvestments.com. Ken, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank. Take care.
You didn't start a business just to keep the lights on. You're here to sell more today than yesterday. You're here to win. Lucky for you, Shopify built the best converting checkout on the planet. Like the just one tapping, ridiculously fast acting, sky-high sales stacking, champion of checkouts. That's the good stuff right there. So if your business is in it to win it, win with Shopify. Start your free trial today at shopify.com/win.
The UCLA men's basketball season's in full swing, and we need you to get to Pauley Pavilion to support the Bruins. Don't miss a single chance to see this year's exciting team, led by Donovan Dent, Eric Daly Jr., Sky Clark, and Tyler Bilodeau. Pauley Pavilion, presented by Westcon Financials, the home of the greatest tradition in all of college basketball. We can't wait to have you join us as the Bruins continue to build on that legacy. With big-time matchups, go to UCLABruins.com/tickets to secure your seats today before it's too late. Let's get Pauley rocking.
It's the biggest game on the planet, and nobody breaks it down like Jim Rome.
Super Bowl run. Who do you think will be the last one standing this year?
Fearless debate and the best callers in sports.
I don't care what you say, defense wins Super Bowl.
That defense absolutely is Super Bowl caliber. The quarterbacking sure as hell wasn't.
He's the Spitfire of sports smack.
A lot to get to, and I'm not sure you're going to like all of it. Honestly, I don't even care if you like all of it or not. I have a job to do.
The Jim Rome Show.
Get up in here.
Follow and listen on your favorite platform.
Thank you very much. Moteca Money continues. 790 KBC. Worst day in a month for the stock market. The Dow plunging 822 points at 48,804. The S&P 500 down 72 at 6838. And the NASDAQ down 259 at 22,627. The volatility index spiking today by 10%. The yield in the 10-year note is back down to 4.04%. Gold getting a pop right now at 5,255 and change. Silver at 88.08 an ounce. Crude oil futures down 5 cents at the moment at 66.26 a barrel. Bitcoin at 64,600. Ethereum at 18.55. Doge at 9 cents. And now the late Moteca Money continues. 790 KABC. The price of oil getting a spike today, right now at around 66 and change. Tensions running high in the Middle East ahead of possible U.S. military action against Iran. Meanwhile, closer to home, U.S. citizens in parts of Mexico now advised to shelter in place because of ongoing violence, which flared over the weekend after a Mexican drug cartel leader was killed. Following all these developments very closely is retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, retired U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, national security analyst, and host of the Strat podcast. Colonel, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Frank, thanks for having me on.
Wonderful to have you with us here. Give us your reaction to the action that we saw in Mexico over the weekend.
Well, it's been busy. Of course, El Mencho, who was something of a nemesis, that's actually his first name, is nemesis in Spanish. But he's a leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, which is one of the most paramilitarized or militarized cartels down there. They're the ones that started using armed drones as part of the cartel violence. Anyway, a very successful action. The whole reports are that U.S. intelligence played some role in this. As you may recall, there's been numerous reports, and I think they even publicly confirmed the U.S. had special operations personnel down there working with the Mexican security forces to try and do something, along the lines of what just happened. Well, in the wake of that, we've just seen a lot of cartel violence. That was a cartel. Without him there, it wasn't clear succession. So there's basically four generals underneath him, and they're all vying for it. And then, of course, the Sinaloa cartel's been kind of in disarray. And so one of the factions in the Sinaloa cartel violence is linked up with New Generation sometime back. So long story short, you had a recipe for a lot of intercartel violence, which is what's happened.
It looks like the battles continue based on the latest reports. Heavily armed Mexican security forces continuing the battle with the cartel gunmen following the killing that sparked all this violence. How do you see this play out, and what is the U.S. role in all this?
Well, the U.S. role is we're supporting them. It's all all partisan rhetoric aside, this probably wouldn't have happened except for the pressure from the Trump White House on Mexico to really crack down the cartels, and even going so far as to say, if you won't do it, we might do unilateral military action against the cartels. Anyway, that has spurred Mexico to do this. But of course, the other side is when they crack down the cartels, you're going to see a lot of violence like this. Right now, if anyone's in Mexico, the U.S. Embassy has told Americans, particularly in Guadalajara, Puerto Vallarta, and a couple of other places, to shelter in place. Basically, don't leave your homes. Don't go to the airport. A number of the major airlines, Mexican Airlines, and international flights have been temporarily canceled or are temporarily canceled until the violence subsides. But there's violence on the streets. There's buildings on fire. There's cars on fire, vehicles on fire. There's gunfire in certain areas. In other words, it's a very violent, dangerous situation.
And it looks like members of the Mexican National Guard were killed, a couple of dozen, based on the last report that I saw. Some pretty fierce firefights going on. What kind of military equipment is involved down there?
Well, as you can imagine, it's across the array. But yes, National Guard troops have been killed. There's a variety of different Mexican security forces that are involved. I haven't seen it specifically mentioned that the Marines down there are involved, but the Mexican Marines have always been played a huge role in dealing with the cartels, and they have some fairly extensive internal security procedures. One of the things they always make sure is that the cartel can't find out who they are, because once the cartel can find out who they are, they can threaten their family, they can threaten them, and that's how they corrupt people. So they've been very careful with that. So all security forces that are involved, there's a lot of, security on who the identities are, and that's the case here. But yeah, it's across the gambit of different types of Mexican police and military forces involved.
And as you probably noted, President Trump has demanded Mexico do more to fight the smuggling of fentanyl, among other things, among other drugs, of course. And might this situation expand beyond this cartel? And are they going to go right down the list here?
Well, the concern is that this thing could get bigger before it gets smaller. That this violence could actually get a lot bigger. And of course, on the far end, the is that you could have a almost civil war break out in parts of Mexico because of the cartel violence. The cartels have a phenomenal amount of money. They have a phenomenal amount of forces, capability, and they're a big chunk of the Mexican economy. And they're very much, a lot of corruption in Mexico, but it's not unique to Mexico, a lot of places. But it does permeate a lot of Mexican society in terms of the influence of the drug money. So there's a lot of fear that if this thing becomes uncorked and gets bigger, that we could see this thing get a lot worse in the coming weeks rather than getting better.
On there live with retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer. Turning now to the Middle East, the chess pieces continue to move there as tensions run high between the U.S. and Iran. Give us your assessment of how things are developing there.
Well, what we have is an extremely large air and naval armada, for lack of better terms. We have never deployed this many forces to the Middle East without taking military action. A little historical benchmark there. Does that mean necessarily that this thing will turn into a kinetic action? That I can't guarantee, but most are looking at this saying more likely than not, there's going to be strikes. Now, President Trump has made it very clear he'd like to see limited strikes. The problem is limited strikes won't achieve the objective, which is he'd like to see the regime change. And he's made that very clear as well. In order to do that, it'd probably be more prolonged strikes. And the news today is that within the Pentagon, led by, Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they're basically putting out a cautionary note saying, look, if we get into this, it's going to be a prolonged campaign. There's going to be a lot of not just bombing, but a lot of air defense action to stop the missiles and the drones coming over from Iran. And that's going to deplete our air defense weaponry. And we need to keep that in mind, because if we deplete it too much and then something happens in the Pacific with China, we may be at a real deficit, a real difficult situation in order to respond. So there's a lot of discussion going on back and forth back in Washington, D.C. I think they're trying to figure out which way do they want to go.
Very interesting. This as Iran threatens to retaliate ferociously. That was the word used today by their foreign ministry spokesman. And what about preparations in Israel for a possible missile launch by Iran?
Well, Israel's getting fully prepared. They will probably be involved. If we do some sort of action, it is more likely than not that Israel will be a part of that. And we might see something akin to what we saw last June, with the exception of we might be in the lead role attacking Iran, and then Israel will come in some sort of supporting role with that alongside of us. But we would definitely, if we're going to do something on that scale, we definitely want to control the airspace. And if we control the airspace, then we're going to dictate any other allied forces, to include Israel, how they would work within that airspace for various different runs. But Israel's prepared, and the thing Israel's aware of is missiles have gotten through their Iron Dome. They have hit, in and around, they've hit various locations, to include their airport, major airport. And so they're prepared and they're getting ready. And this could be big. And one of the things we've seen with Iran is, since last June, they've been trying to, replace and modernize what they can with their missile capabilities. So the feeling is it'll be kind of like last June, but it could be a lot bigger than last June.
You think the U.S. will use nuclear weapons in this case?
I don't think that. And the only thing that would change that is if somehow there could be a situation where Iran does have a nuclear weapon and everybody has missed it, and then Iran uses that nuclear weapon. But in that situation, although Israel has never really admitted to having nuclear weapons, everybody's assessed for decades that they have nuclear weapons. If they were going to use a nuclear weapon, where would they use it? Well, they'd probably try to use it against Israel. And if they did that, then at that point, I think all bets are off. I don't think it'll be us using nuclear weapons, but you might see nuclear retaliation if something like that happens.
Colonel, thank you very much for taking the call on all these very serious matters here. We look forward to keeping the line open to you. That is retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, retired U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, national security expert and analyst, and host of the Strat podcast. Thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank.
The UCLA men's basketball season's in full swing, and we need you to get to Pauley Pavilion to support the Bruins. Don't miss a single chance to see this year's exciting team, led by Donovan Dent, Eric Daly Jr., Sky Clark, and Tyler Bilodeau. Pauley Pavilion, presented by Westcon Financials, the home of the greatest tradition in all of college basketball. We can't wait to have you join us as the Bruins continue to build on that legacy. With big-time matchups, go to UCLABruins.com/tickets to secure your seats today before it's too late. Let's get Pauley rocking.
The CJ Pearson Show.
Every week, we'll take on the biggest cultural, political, and moral battles in America head on.
CJ presents the most passionate voices in the Black community.
When you're going around and talking to people in actual communities, you get to know what people actually care about.
As a Black man, why can't I be the first one in my family to graduate from college? Why can't it be me? Shift the way that I think about the world.
Bold truth, real conviction, zero permission. This is the CJ Pearson Show.
The CJ Pearson Show. Follow and listen on your favorite platform.
Otaka Money continues, 790 KBC. Worst day in a month for the stock market, with the Dow plunging 822 points at the closing bell today at 48,804. S&P 500 down 72. NASDAQ down 259. The market's digesting the U.S. Supreme Court ruling on the tariffs. Last week, President Trump over the weekend said he would now increase to 15% his new global tariff, aimed at replacing many of the tariffs ruled illegal by the High Court last week. In the meantime, we also heard from the U.S. Trade Representative saying the U.S. intends to hold to its existing bilateral trade deals. And after the Supreme Court ruling, President Trump now pondering new national security tariffs. Keeping track of all of this, our Legal Eagle, longtime KABC Legal Eagle Royal Oaks legal analyst and co-host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast. Royal Oaks, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Hey, my pleasure, Frank. Who knew we'd all become such experts on the statutory grounds for tariffs, but here we are. And it's so fun because it's almost like Donald Trump is playing poker with himself, because you remember the day the big decision came out a few days ago, he said, well, I'm going to go for a 10% tariff on this other statute. And now he's like, I'll see my own 10% and I'll raise it to 15%. So that's where we are today. He's very optimistic about the future.
Yeah, so give us your reaction to the big news that was widely expected. It finally did happen last week, and your reaction and what's going to happen next year.
Well, it was kind of expected, wasn't it? Because a few months ago, when the Supreme Court held the oral argument, you can usually tell, Frank, where the justices are coming from by their questions. And we could tell that it was not going to be good news for Donald Trump, even among the Republican appointees. And sure enough, they came out and in 6-3 decision. It wasn't even that close. In the 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court said, look, the Constitution says Congress does tariffs, okay? Now we have this statute, and it's an emergency economic statute, and it gives the president power to do some special stuff to protect us if we have an economic emergency, if we need to have sanctions against Iran, the bad guys, and freeze assets, and say you can't do business with North Korea. That's the kind of special economic regulation the statute justifies. Well, Donald Trump, according to the Supreme Court, got too creative, and he said, well, that economic regulation and economic emergency law justifies tariffs as well. But the Supreme Court said, nice try, sir. They actually don't. And so they're gone. Interestingly, though, Frank, as you know, the court was silent on whether refunds are appropriate. Now, about $165 billion that was collected. When China sends some steel and it comes to the port of LA and General Electric buys it, GE had to send a check to Uncle Sam in Washington, and GE and all the other people who sent checks are now they're going to have their hands out, even though there was no word from the Supreme Court as to whether refunds are appropriate. But very likely, when it's litigated, the court will say yes, they may get refunds.
All right, you become an expert on all these sections and the trade laws, right? Section 232, Section 301, and all of this. It looks like the president had used one of those sections to issue tariffs on steel, aluminum, copper, cars, trucks, and auto parts during his second term, and those tariffs were not affected by the Supreme Court decision, just adding to the confusion here. So what ultimately is going to happen? Costco, for example, is one of the major retailers that is also suing for refunds, and looks like they're prevailing at this point. What other fallout do you see from all this?
Yeah, and you're alluding to these sections, and everybody's tossing numbers around, 203, 132. It's like alphabet soup only with numbers. But what it boils down to is that the law the president relied on that said, hey, the president can act for an economic emergency, he shifted because, he had months to plan for this because he kind of knew he was going to lose. So he cited 3 different statutes that say, well, tariffs are okay even without Congress if there's a balance of payments crisis, if there's a trade secret crisis, if there's an economic crisis. The problem is they all come with some big asterisks. For example, the 10 and 15% statute he's relying on, he gets to do it, but it only lasts 5 months. And then after 5 months, it turns into a pumpkin unless Congress says, yes, it gets extended. The other statutes don't have a limitation, but they do have hurdles. You have to jump through hoops and actually prove that there is a trade secret emergency, and that can take time. So it's going to be a bumpy road for him. He's obviously very frustrated, and as you know, Frank, there's a lot of negative reaction by the president and his supporters against some people that he appointed to the Supreme Court. He is not happy with Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett. He was very happy with the Kavanaugh. He appointed him, and he came through for him on the tariffs. But other than Kavanaugh, it was just Scalia and Alito, not Scalia, that's the past, Clarence Thomas and Alito. So those are the only 3 that went for the president on this big decision last week.
All right, I forgot to mention Section 122, by the way, and all of this expected to face more legal challenges, right? So you talk about too many lawyers, they're going to be busy here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like tap dancing in molasses to try to resolve these legal issues. It's going to be months or years before we know if he really does have the right to do that. And I always appreciate your nice plug, Frank, for my podcast, Too Many Lawyers. And this is the world premiere plug for the show because we've changed it, Frank, and I've waited till your show to announce it. We have a chill vibe. My son Connor and I now, let me just say adult beverages are involved. And it's not quite like Bill Maher and his Club Random podcast where he fires up a joint. We don't actually go that route, but adult beverages are involved. So by the end of the lengthy episode, things are out of control, Frank. So if people want to see it, it's video, go to YouTube and just type in @TooManyLawyers Podcast, and you're going to see my son Connor like you've never seen him before. And I get a little out of control as well.
See it tonight, read about it tomorrow, but hear it now on Motec on Money on 790 KBC. That is, appreciate you breaking that news for us here. The congratulations on your video podcast, and that's great. Your son also an attorney, right? And how's he doing?
Absolutely. He's doing great, except he's wrong on every single issue. That's the whole deal. We disagree on literally everything, but the whole shtick of the show is we do it with respect and love, which I think you've probably noticed, Frank, people don't actually disagree that way anymore in America. So we're hoping to start a trend.
Well, terrific. Well, we wish you all the best with the new video podcast. Send our best regards to your son as well, and appreciate you coming on the air with us every single time. That is our legal eagle, Royal Oaks, longtime legal analyst here at 790 KBC, and also co-host, as you just heard, of the Too Many Lawyers podcast and the new video podcast on YouTube. We'll look at that today here. Royal, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
You bet. Thanks, Frank.
Appreciate it very much. And let's recap the day on Wall Street. It was a rough day, in fact, the worst day in a month for the major stock market averages, with the Dow tumbling 822 points at the closing bell, the S&P 500 down 72, and the NASDAQ down 259. The yield in the 10-year note is back down to 4.04%. The volatility index spiked today by 10%. Gold had a good day, back above $5,200 an ounce, $52.55. Silver also got a pop right now, just above $88 an ounce. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with my buddy Randy Wang, and I'll be back with more at 4 tomorrow afternoon here on 790 KBC.
The UCLA men's basketball season's in full swing, and we need you to get to Pauley Pavilion to support the Bruins. Don't miss a single chance to see this year's exciting team, led by Donovan Dent, Eric Daly Jr., Sky Clark, and Tyler Bilodeau. Pauley Pavilion, presented by Westcon Financials, the home of the greatest tradition in all of college basketball. We can't wait to have you join us as the Bruins continue to build on that legacy. With big-time matchups, go to UCLABruins.com/tickets to secure your seats today before it's too late. Let's get Pauley rocking.